And maybe, just maybe, you can learn from my mistakes. What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Toast Hammer. It is hashtag New Year, New Army for me, and I'm building my first model 2 months in. Off to a great start. But seriously, I was waiting for some parts to ship before I could truly build my first Custodes. And as I said previously, this is going to be a 100% converted and kit-bashed army. So I knew I had to do a test model before I could really figure out what my process is going to be to build these guys. Now that is maybe the only mistake I didn't make in this process, but I'm going to take you through what I did, what went wrong, and how you can avoid the same mistakes in your own hobbying journey. So without any further ado, let's get into this Custodes conversion of just a normal custodian guard. Alright, the first step in assembling this custode was to make sure I know how all the parts go together, because there's going to be a lot of changes happening, and I want to make sure that I know how the model is assembled. But after that is taken care of, the very next step is to shave away some of the imperial aquillas that appear on this guy. And let me tell you, there's a lot of them. My reason for doing this is, one, I think it's a little bit too detailed of an armor plating for my personal taste, and two, my version of Custodes is going to be the King in Yellow variation as described by Dan Abnett's Penitent. Now, it hasn't yet been confirmed, in fact, that the King in Yellow and his minions are, in fact, Constantine Valdor or his custodian shield host, but I'm just taking a swing and rolling with it anyway, because I think even if it's wrong, this will be a cool alternate universe thing where that was the case. And I get some cool, unique models out of it anyway. So the first thing to do was to shave off some of these aquillas, because what I noticed in the description of the City of Dust, where Beta finds herself, is that there are no imperial sigils anywhere. There's nothing to let her know that this is under the Imperium, and we don't in fact know if it is. So I thought that getting rid of a lot of these aquillas would help reinforce this fact that we don't actually know who these guys are or where they come from. And for the most part, the process goes pretty smoothly. It's not actually that difficult to shave these off as long as you're careful. Use a sharp knife, don't cut too deeply, and then just go over it with some sandpaper or any sort of other duller implement to kind of smooth the surface afterwards. That is until I got to the greaves, which is the leg or calf armor, and that is where I started running into issues, because there's a lot of weird sort of curved surfaces there that I had trouble really sort of finessing with my X-Acto blade. I'm not sure if it wasn't quite sharp enough, or if it's just that the angles were hard to cut around in that pattern, and I ended up making several dents, scratches, and bumps along the way, which leads to my first kind of mistake for this project. Make sure you're using the right tools for the right job. I don't think that the X-Acto knife is maybe the right implement to handle these more concave and complex surfaces, so I think in my next handling of this project, I might go forward with like a file or something to get the bulk of it down and then hit it with sanding paper after that. Or perhaps some other tool. If you know of a good tool for this purpose, let me know in the comments below. Maybe I just use sandpaper and progressively go up to smaller and smaller grits to get it smoother and smooth it out. But either way, I made my mistakes and now I have to lay with them. So the armor ended up looking a little bit janky at this point, but I had to push forward anyway, because I had a video to do. So for my next big mistake, I decided to use a brand new sculpting material, which is Tamiya Quick Type sculpting putty. I've heard very good things. I've heard it being compared favorably to green stuff before by Squidmar and other people in sort of the hobby space. So I wanted to give it a try myself. So let's see how that part goes wrong. But before we get to actually mixing the putty, I have to bring in my other set of tools for this conversion, which is a bunch of custom resin bits from Liber Daemonica, who make a lot of very cool sort of future space war legally distinct bits that I think match the aesthetic of Custodes really well in this instance. And a lot of them are Aquila free, because that, my friends, is a trademark, so they can't use it, I'm pretty sure. But, you know, I'm happy, because that's not what I was looking for anyway. So I got a couple of their prints because there's more Aquilas on their helmets and their shoulder pads and things like that. And instead of just carving up all of these shoulder pads and helmets, why not just get some pretty awesome looking helmets and have some unique pieces in my army in the first place? So with those resin pieces in hand, I could begin combining the Tamiya putty, which at first glance seems to behave a lot like green stuff. It has that same kind of chewed bubblegum consistency after you totally mix it up, and it has a working time of roughly an hour. The instructions were a little bit unclear. They said wear gloves, so I did, but then the picture had the guy not wearing gloves. In the picture in the instructions, he wasn't wearing gloves in it, and the times when things were workable were stated as a couple of different times in different parts of the instructions, so I just kind of guesstimated. But that wasn't the mistake I made. The second mistake I made is that when you're sculpting things, doing it in batches is actually way easier. Let me tell you, the amount of times things came apart or came out of position while I was sculpting this model was bad. Because I didn't really have time to wait for things to set, because then the rest of my putty would set before I got to sculpting with it, and it was just really kind of a big mess. A better way to approach sculpting projects, if you know you have to do multiple of the same sort of modifications to a model, is to do them one portion at a time. For example, I wanted to lengthen the torso by putting a little bit of putty in between the chest and abdomen parts of this model kit to kind of even out and lengthen the proportions a little bit more. And that would be, for example, a step that you could do for all of the people in your squad with a little bit of putty. And, you know, by the time that cures, then you can move on to the next steps. But I didn't have the luxury of doing that because I mixed up a bunch of putty and then I had to do all of the model before the putty set. But then when the putty didn't set, it kept moving and shifting out of place on the model that I was working on. So that happened more times than I can count. And I did end up having a little bit of leftover putty, so I decided to sculpt a little bit of extra hair on my sister's Hospitaller, which is my new sort of character for my Warhammer TTRPG that I'm playing with my friends. And then I still had some more left after that, so I decided to sculpt up some cables, because you can never have enough cables, let's be honest. But after struggling with things shifting out of place, my one triumph being the head, because I could keep that totally separate. In fact, I over-sculpted it a bit, knowing I could shave it down later after the Tamiya putty had cured. That's one thing I really like about this modeling compound, is that after it is fully cured, you can cut it, you can sand it. It's a very workable surface even when it is fully cured, unlike green stuff. And it seems to be not as sort of messy to work with as Milliput, so I really appreciate that part of it. It has kind of the best of both worlds there. So that was a really nice thing about my experience. The rest was just a hell of my own design, trying to get the legs to stick together. I did end up having to shave off one of the legs to extend the knee joints, and then trying to sculpt the sort of, I think they're called culvers in between the armor, the sort of ridged parts of the joins in the armor while not getting the leg to fall off proved to be a Herculean effort. And every time I squished the leg back on, the putty would be kind of moved out of place, and this endless cycle would repeat until I was at my wit's end in tears. Yeah, just a full body despair experience. Which came to my third kind of mistake that I made, doing these leg extensions specifically. One, I don't even know that they're that effective in effectively making my custode taller. I think the torso and neck modifications might just do the job themselves. And this was by far the most difficult part of the modification. So I think in the future I might test out just leaving that out. And if I decide that I don't really like it, I can go back to doing the leg extensions, but then I'll at least have the knowledge that they are necessary. And then I'll just have one dude who's just like a little bit shorter, because there is some height variation in between them. But because it was so difficult to do, what I should be doing is in fact pinning them in place using a little bit of wire in between to mark the length of the extension, and then sculpting around them. And again, doing that in batches is going to let me do each part separately, letting it cure and letting me work around it without fear of messing up another one of my parts while the putty is still uncured. So a lot of this really comes down to I'm not good at sculpting. But this is why you do test models. If you're doing a new army, you always have to do a test model. Even if you're not doing a kit bash, it's great to have a test model to test a paint scheme out. And if you don't like it, just prime over it again and start back over. No one's going to notice. It's not going to ruin the details on your model with that amount of paint on it. I promise you. Unless you're using like extra thick paint that, you know, don't do that. You don't do that either. Be mindful of the consistency of your paint and don't just glob it on there. But it's so important to do a test for anything that you're totally unsure of the process of, or that you have not attempted before, whether that's in painting or in kit bashing or in anything else, in order to establish those processes and to find those mistakes that you can later address and develop in your hobby career. Because now I have a much better idea of how to approach this entire kit bash army, and although this one dude probably took about like 3 hours to assemble, I want to say, which is way more than it should have taken, but that's kind of just how it ended up being. Now I have a much more strong idea of my mental processes going forward with how I'm going to approach this army, and a lot more of the kinks worked out when approaching it going forward to apply those teachings to each subsequent model to speed up the process and get these guys painted and on the table. But hey, I finished a custode, so that's model 1 of 9 for my combat patrol. So maybe it's a good thing that my main goal was to just do the combat patrol. Hopefully I'll get more done than that. I have a lot more planned for sure, but we'll see how the year progresses and if I start going bald out of, again, just an endless pit of despair of deciding to do a fully 100% converted army. But that is it. So let's throw some primer on this guy and you can have a look. I think it turned out, honestly, okay. Some of the knee stuff is like a little bit messy. Some of the greaves parts are a little bit messy, but only if you look really closely, I think. Otherwise, I'm really happy with how it turned out. So here's a peek at the first member of the shield host of the King in Yellow. I very much hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, consider leaving it a like. It always helps me out. And what sort of test projects have you utilized in order to improve your hobby processing overall? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see more progress on this 100% converted Custodes army, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single video, because there's definitely going to be more of them coming this year. I have a lot of spicy kit bashes planned. I got to come up with a paint scheme for them. You may have noticed that I didn't use my normal Zenithal Prime in this video, and that is going to come up later when I test out some paint schemes, which is probably going to be in the next couple of videos or so. So stay tuned for that. And if you're curious on following my progress offline, come check out the Toast Hammer Discord link in the description below to hang out with the rest of our community. And until next time, peace!